My name was Johannes Llewellyn Drury. I was named Llewellyn at my mother's desire out of respect to her father, Dr. Evan Llewellyn, the scientist and speculative philosopher well known to Cura's students as author of various rare works on occult subjects. The other given names were ancestral also, but when I reached the age of appreciation they naturally became distasteful. So it is that in early youth I dropped the first and third of these cumbersome words and retained only the second Christian name. While perhaps the reader of these lines may regard this cognomen with less favor than either of the others, still I liked it, as it was the favorite of my mother, who always used the name in full. The world, however, contracted Llewellyn to Lou, much to the distress of my dear mother, who felt aggrieved at the liberty. After her death I decided to move to a western city, and also determined, out of respect to her memory, to select from and rearrange the letters of my several names, and construct therefrom 3 short terse words which would convey to myself only the resemblance of my former name. Hence it is that the Cincinnati Directory does not record my self-selected name, which I have no reason to bring before the public. To the reader, my name is Llewellyn Drury. I might add that my ancestors were among the early settlers of what is now New York City, and were direct descendants of the early Welsh kings. But these matters do not concern the reader, and it is not of them that I now choose to write. My object in putting down these preliminary paragraphs is simply to assure the reader of such facts, and such only as may give him confidence in my personal sincerity and responsibility, in order that he may with a right understanding read the remarkable statements that occur in the succeeding chapters. The story I am about to relate is very direct, and some parts of it are strange, not to say marvelous. But not on the account of its strangeness alone do I ask for the narrative of reading that were mere trifling. What is here set down happened as recorded, but I shall not attempt to explain things, even when to myself, are enigmatical. Let the candid reader read the story as I have told it, and make out of it what he can, or let him pass the page by unread. I shall not insist on claiming his further attention. Only if he does read, I beg him to read with an open mind, without prejudice and without predilection. Who or what I am as a participant in this work is of small importance. I mention my history only for the sake of frankness and fairness. I have nothing to gain by issuing the volume. Neither do I court praise nor shun censor. My purpose is to tell the truth. Early in the 50s I took up my residence in the Queen City, and though a very young man, found the employment ready that a friend had obtained for me with a manufacturing firm engaged in a large and complicated business. My duties were varied and peculiar, of such a nature as to tax body and mind to the utmost, and for several years I served in the most exacting of business details. Besides the labor which my vocation entailed, with its manifold and multiform perplexities, I voluntarily imposed upon myself other tasks, which I pursued in the privacy of my own bachelor apartments. An inherited love for books on abstruse and occult subjects, probably in part the result of my blood connection with Dr. Evan Llewellyn, caused me to collect a unique library, largely on mystical subjects, in which I took the keenest delight. My business and my professional duties by day, and my studies at night, made my life a busy one. In the midst of my work and reading I encountered a character whose strange story forms the essential part of the following narrative. I may appreciate by saying that the manuscript to follow only incidentally concerns myself, and that if possible I would relinquish all connection therewith. It recites the physical, mental, and moral adventures of one whose life history was abruptly thrust upon my attention, and as abruptly interrupted. The vicissitudes of his body and soul, circumstances seem to compel me to learn and to make public. Etidorhpa, Chapter 1. Never less alone than when alone. More than 30 years ago occurred the first of the series of remarkable events I am about to relate. The exact date I cannot recall, but it was in November, and to those familiar with November, whether in the Ohio Valley, it is hardly necessary to state that the month is one of possibilities. That is to say, It is liable to bring every variety of weather, from the delicious, dreamy Indian summer days that linger late in the fall to a combination of rain, hail, snow, sleet, in short, atmospheric conditions sufficiently aggravating to develop a suicidal mania in any one that least susceptible to such influences. While the general character of the month is much the same the country over, showing dull gray tones of sky, abundant rains that penetrate man as they do the earth, cold shifting winds that search the very marrow, it is always safe to count more or less upon the possibility of the unexpected throughout the month. The particular day which ushered in the event about to be chronicled was one of those possible heterogeneous days presenting a combination of sunshine, shower, and snow, with winds that rang all the changes from balmy to blustery, a morning air of caloric, and an evening of numbing cold. The early morning started fair and sunny. Later came light showers, suddenly switched by shifting winds into blinding sleet, until the middle of the afternoon found the four winds and all the elements commingled in one wild orgy, with clashing and roaring as of a great organ, with all the stops out and all the storm fiends dancing over the keyboards. Nightfall brought some semblance of order to the sounding chaos, but still kept up the wild music of a typical November day, with every accompaniment of bleakness, gloom, and desolation. Thousands of chimneys, exhaling murky clouds of bitterness soot all day, had covered the city with the proverbial pall, which the winds in their sport had shifted hither and yon, but as thoroughly tired out, they subsided into silence. The smoky mesh suddenly settled over the houses and into the streets, taking possession of the city, and contributing to the melancholy wretchedness of such of the inhabitants as had to be out of doors. Through this smoke the red sun, when visible, had dragged his downward course in manifest discouragement, and the hastening twilight soon gave place to the blackness of darkness. Night reigned supreme. 30 years ago electric lighting was not in vogue, and the system of street lamps was far less complete than at present, although the gas burned in them may not have been any worse. The lamps were much fewer and farther between, and the light which they emitted had a feeble, sickly aspect, and did not reach any distance into the moist and murky atmosphere. And so the night was dismal enough, and the few people upon the street were visible only as they passed directly beneath the lamps, or in front of lighted windows, seeming at other times like moving shadows against a black ground. As I am like to be conspicuous in these pages, it may be proper to say that I am very susceptible to atmospheric influences. I figure among my friends as a man of quiet disposition, but I am at times morose, although I endeavor to conceal this fact from others. My nervous system is a sensitive weather glass. Sometimes I fancy that I must have been born under the planet Saturn, for I find myself unpleasantly influenced by moods ascribed to that depressing planet, more especially in its disagreeable phases, for I regret to state that I do not find corresponding elation as I should in its brighter aspects. I have an especial dislike for wintry weather, a dislike which I find growing with my years until it has developed almost into positive antipathy and dread. On the day I have described, my moods had varied with the weather. The fitfulness of the winds have found its way into my feelings, and the somber tone of the clouds into my meditations. I was restless as the elements, and a deep sense of dissatisfaction with myself and everything else possessed me. I could not content myself in any place or position. Reading was distasteful, riding equally so, but it occurred to me that a brisk walk for a few blocks might afford relief. Muffling myself up in my overcoat and fur cap, I took the street, only to find the air gusty and raw, and I gave up in still greater disgust, and returning home, after drawing the curtains and locking the doors, planted myself in front of a growing great fire, firmly resolved to rid myself of myself, by resorting to the oblivion of thought, reverie, or dream. To sleep was impossible, and I sat moodily in an easy chair, noting the quarter and half-hour strokes as they were chimed out sweetly from the spire of St. Peter's Cathedral a few blocks away. 9 o'clock passed with its silver-voiced song of Home Sweet Home. 10 and then 11 strokes of the preponderous bell, which noted the hours, roused me to a strenuous effort to shake off the feeling of despondency, unrest, and turbulence that all continued to produce a state of mental and physical misery now insufferable. Rising suddenly from my chair without a conscious effort, I walked mechanically to a bookcase, seized a volume at random, reseated myself before the fire, and opened the book. It proved to be an odd, neglected volume, Riley's Dictionary of Latin Quotations. At the moment there flashed upon me a conscious duality of existence. Had the old book some mesmeric power? I seemed to myself two persons, and I quickly said aloud, as if addressing my double, "If I cannot quiet you, turbulent spirit, I can at least adapt myself to your condition. I will read this book haphazard from bottom to top, or backward if necessary, and if this does not change the subject often enough, I will try Noah Webster." Opening the book mechanically at page 297, I glanced at the bottom line and read, "Num quam minus solus quam cum solus," never less alone than when alone. These words arrested my thoughts at once as, by a singular chance, they seemed to fit my mood. Was it, or was it not, some conscious invisible intelligence that caused me to select that page, and brought the apothegm to my notice? Again, like a flash, came the consciousness of duality, and I began to argue with my other self. "This is arrant nonsense," I cried aloud, even though Cicero did say it, and it is on a par with many other delusive maxims that have for so many years embittered the existence of our modern youth by misleading thought. Do you know, Mr. Cicero, that this statement is not sound? That it is unworthy the position you occupy in history as a thinker and philosopher? That it is a contradiction in itself, for if a man is alone, he is alone, and that settles it? I mused in this vein a few moments, and then resumed aloud. "It won't do, it won't do. If one is alone, the word is absolute. He is single, isolated, in short, alone, and there could be no matter of possibility to be anyone else present. Take myself, for instance. I am the sole occupant of this apartment. I am alone, and yet you say in so many words that I was never less alone than at this instant. It was not without some misgiving that I uttered these words, for the strange consciousness of my own duality constantly grew stronger, and I could not shake off the reflection that even now there were two of myself in the room, and that I was not so much alone as I endeavored to convince myself. This feeling opposed me like an incubus. I must throw it off, and rising, I tossed the book upon the table, exclaiming, "What folly! I am alone, positively. There is no other living thing visible or invisible in the room." I hesitated as I spoke, for the strange, undefined sensation that I was not alone had become almost a conviction. But the sound of my voice encouraged me, and I determined to discuss the subject, and I remarked in a full, strong voice, "I am surely alone. I know I am. Why, I'll wager everything I possess, even to my soul, that I am alone." I stood facing the smoldering embers of the fire, which I had neglected to replenish, uttering these words to settle the controversy for good, and all with one person of my dual self, but the other ego seemed to dissent violently, when a soft, clear voice claimed my ear. "You have lost your wager. You are not alone." My name was Johannes Llewellyn Drury. I was named Llewellyn at my mother's desire, out of respect to her father, Dr. Evan Llewellyn, the scientist and speculative philosopher well known to curious students as the author of various rare works on occult subjects. who always used the name in full. The world, however, contracted Llewellyn to Lou, much to the distress of my dear mother, who felt aggrieved at the liberty. After her death I decided to move to a western city, and also determined, out of respect to her memory, to select from and rearrange the letters of my several names, and construct therefrom 3 short terse words which would convey to my... The other given names were ancestral also, but when I reached the age of appreciation they naturally became distasteful. So it is that in early youth I dropped the first and third of these cumbersome words, and retained only the second Christian name. While perhaps the reader of these lines may regard this cognomen with less favor than either of the others, still I liked it, as it was the favorite of my mother herself only, the resemblance of my former name. Hence it is that the Cincinnati Directory does not record my self-selected name, which I have no reason to bring before the public. To the reader, my name is Llewellyn Drury. I might add that my ancestors were among the early settlers of what is now New York City, and were direct descendants of the early Welsh kings.